The real cause behind GM, Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai engine disasters is not what the dealers are telling you, and today I'm going to lay the whole thing out on the bench for you. Right now, more than 5 million engines from GM, Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai are failing. Some of them are catching fire with families sitting inside. $70,000 trucks are dropping dead at 30,000 miles, and the folks who bought them are still making payments on a machine that will not turn over. This is not a run of bad luck. This is not one bad batch that slipped past a tired inspector on a Friday afternoon. This is something baked right into how these engines get designed and built, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I have been turning wrenches on diesel trucks for the better part of 40 years. I have torn down engines on my own bench that came in running fine one week and grenaded the next. I know what a spun bearing looks like. I know what metal shavings in the oil pan feel like when you rub them between your fingers. I know the difference between an engine that died from abuse and one that died because somebody upstream made a choice that doomed it before the key ever went in. What is happening right now to these late model engines is the second kind, and I am tired of watching good working people get blamed for it. I'm Earl, and I've been obsessed with cars and tinkering the better part of my life, so if that's your kind of talk, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now stick with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why these engines are dying and exactly what you can do to keep yours off the tow truck. Let me give you the numbers first, because the scale of this thing is hard to believe until you hear it laid out. GM recalled 720,000 vehicles over the 6.2-liter V8. Another 280,000 are under federal investigation right now. There have been more than 28,000 complaints filed, and over 14,000 of those ended in complete engine failure. Not a rattle, not a check engine light, a dead engine. 12 people injured. 42 engines caught fire under the hood while somebody was driving down the road in a Silverado, a Tahoe, a Yukon, or an Escalade. Picture that. You are doing 70 on the interstate with your kids in the back, and the thing under your hood decides to burn. Toyota is no better, and that one hurts to say because Toyota built its whole name on lasting forever. In 2024, they recalled 102,000 of their twin-turbo V6 engines. Late in 2025, they added roughly another 127,000. That covers Tundras, $90,000 Lexus LX 600S, Sequoias, and the hybrids are under investigation too. Honda recalled 250,000 of its 3.5-liter V6 for rod-bearing failure. That means metal shrapnel flying around inside the engine at thousands of RPM. On top of that, NHTSA opened a probe into 1.4 million Hondas, going all the way back to 2016. Hyundai and Kia have recalled 1.5 million engines since 2017, and here is the part that should make you sit up. Some of the replacement engines failed the exact same way as the ones they replaced. Add it all together, and you are looking at over 5 million engines and close to $8 billion in damage. 8 billion. That is not a fluke. That is a pattern, and patterns have causes. So let me tell you what is actually killing these engines, because it is not one single thing. It is a stack of choices piled one on top of the other. And the first one, the foundation under all of it, is something the engineers call power density. Back in December of 2025, Automotive News ran an investigation working with university researchers and independent mechanics, and they put their finger right on it. The automakers are chasing record horsepower per liter. That sounds like a good thing if you are reading a brochure, but let me show you what it really means. Back in the 1990s, a 6.0-liter V8 made about 360 horsepower. That works out to about 60 horsepower per liter, and those engines ran forever because they were loafing. They were barely working. Now look at today. A Ford 2.7-liter EcoBoost makes 325 horsepower. That is 120 horsepower per liter. The 3.5 EcoBoost in a Raptor hits 128 horsepower per liter. That is double the power density of the old engine, the same amount of stress and heat, but coming out of half the metal. You are asking a smaller, lighter engine to do twice the work, and physics does not care about your marketing department. The loads have to go somewhere, and they go straight into the bearings in the block. Now stack the next thing on top of that. Oil. To hit the EPA and CAFE fuel targets, the oils these engines call for got thinner and thinner. We went from good, honest 5W30 and 10W40, the stuff I grew up running, down to 0W20, then 0W16, and now some of them spec 0W8. Let me tell you, 0W8 is barely thicker than water. You pour it, and it runs like it wants to get away from you. And what does all that thin oil buy you? Maybe half a mile per gallon. That is it. But here is the trade. Thin oil like that demands tolerances measured in microns. A micron is a thousandth of a millimeter. That means the machining, the cleaning, and the assembly all have to be dead perfect, because there is almost no oil film left to cover any mistakes. Professor Greg Davis over at the University of Michigan Flint spelled it right out. Higher pressures create greater bearing loads and accelerated wear. That is a man with letters after his name confirming what any old wrench already knew. Thin oil and hard run bearings do not get along. Now here is where it gets down into the dirt, and this is the part I want you to really hear, because this is the smoking gun that nobody in a suit wants to talk about. It is called swarf. Swarf is the microscopic metal debris left behind from machining. When they hone the cylinder walls, that process leaves behind ultrafine particles. Dave, who runs Dave's Auto Center, describes it better than I could. He calls it a slurry of metal dust, abrasive grit, and coolant, and he calls the stuff concrete. It is brittle, it is razor sharp, it is harder than the bearings themselves, and it sticks like glue to everything inside that engine. Now think about what that means. One microscopic piece of that swarf gets caught between a bearing and the crankshaft, and it acts like a sheet of sandpaper spinning at thousands of RPM. You get scoring in minutes, metal on metal contact in hours, total failure in days. One speck, that is all it takes. Dave's team cleans every engine they build by hand 5 or 6 times because they know what one leftover particle does. Now here is the problem. GM builds 10,000 engines a day at a single factory. 10,000. There's no way on this green earth to hand clean an engine 5 or 6 times each at that kind of speed. It simply cannot be done. So instead of hand cleaning, the automakers lean on automated rinses and quick visual checks. A machine sprays it down, a fellow glances at it, and it moves on down the line. Tom Howell, who tests these things, laid out the full picture. Thinner oils, tighter tolerances, and harder bearing materials all pile on together. And those harder bearings, they are less forgiving. An old soft bearing would let a little bit of grit embed into it and keep going. These new hard bearings give you almost zero margin. The grit has nowhere to hide, so it just grinds. So you already have 3 strikes stacked up before the engine ever leaves the factory. Too much power crammed into too little metal, oil too thin to protect anything, and a real chance of leftover grit riding around inside. But the automakers did not stop there. They kept adding features, and every one of them makes the odds worse. I call it the perfect storm, and I want to walk you through each piece of it. The first piece is start-stop technology. You know the deal. You pull up to a red light, and the engine shuts off to save a thimble of fuel, then fires back up when you lift off the brake. Here is what that does that nobody tells you. Every single time that engine shuts off, the oil pressure drops to zero. Zero. And on a typical commute, you might do 40 or 50 of those stop cycles. That is 40 or 50 times a day the bearings get a moment, with no oil pressure holding them apart. And here is the proof it matters. Fleet trucks that run 150,000 highway miles often outlast city trucks with only 50,000 on them. Why? Because the highway truck almost never uses start-stop. It just runs. The city truck is cycling all day long, grinding itself down at every light. The second piece is the oil pump itself. The old engines I cut my teeth on used a simple fixed oil pump. It turned with the engine, it moved oil, end of story, dead reliable. Now they use variable displacement, computer-controlled oil pumps. The idea is to save a hair of energy by only pumping as much oil as the computer thinks you need. But a computer can lag, a computer can miscalculate, and when it does, it starves the bearings of oil right when they need it most. You added a brain to something that worked better as a dumb, honest pump. The third piece is the turbocharging, and this one is brutal. These little engines are running 2,000 psi and more of cylinder pressure, with turbos spinning 150,000 to 200,000 RPM. Let that number sink in, 200,000 RPM. At that speed, any contamination at all destroys the turbo bearings, and when a turbo lets go, it sends shrapnel straight through the rest of the engine. There is no coming back from that. The fourth piece is direct injection. They spray the fuel straight into the cylinder, now at 2 to 3,000 psi. That gives you higher combustion pressures, which is more stress again, and because the fuel no longer washes across the back of the intake valves the way it used to, carbon builds up thick on those valves. On top of that, the oil film in there is running hotter and thinner than ever. Every one of these things pushes the same direction, toward more heat and less protection. The fifth piece is timing, and it is an ugly one. From 2020 through 2022, the COVID years, the factories were a mess. New suppliers nobody had vetted, inspectors staying home, skeleton crews trying to keep the line moving. And the defects that got built in during those years are surfacing right now at 60 to 100,000 miles. GM had out-of-spec connecting rods, Toyota had contamination get into engines, Stellantis, believe it or not, had actual casting sand left inside engine blocks. Sand in the block. That stuff was built 2, 3, 4 years ago, and it is only now coming home to roost. The sixth piece is cylinder deactivation. To save fuel, these V8s shut down half their cylinders and run as a V4 when you're cruising. Sounds clever. But now you have got half the engine cold and half of it hot, the block expanding unevenly, and then when you put your foot down and those dead cylinders slam back to life, they take a shock load over and over thousands of times. Metal does not like being heated and cooled and shocked like that. It fatigues. Now here's where I get good and angry, because up to this point you could almost call it incompetence. But this next part is a cover-up. There is an independent builder named Eric Berg who spent 3 years, just trying to get his hands on a failed Toyota twin-turbo V6 to tear it down. Why was it so hard? Because Toyota was buying back the blown engines as core exchanges, snapping them up to keep them out of independent shops where somebody might actually look inside. Think about that. If it was just debris, just bad luck, why work so hard to keep the corpses off the autopsy table? When Eric finally got one apart, here is what he found, and this is the tell. The main bearings were destroyed, scored, heat burned, wiped out. But the rod bearings, fed by the very same oil circuit, the same oil, were pristine. Now think that through with me. If dirty oil or debris were the cause, both sets of bearings would be chewed up because they drink from the same well. But only the mains failed. That does not point to dirt. That points to a design flaw. The oil passages feeding the mains are too small, or the clearances are too tight, or the bearing material is simply overloaded by that power density we talked about. And here is why they will not admit it. Debris you can blame on a supplier or a bad batch. A design flaw means the engine itself is wrong, and fixing that is far more expensive to own up to. We have seen this movie before too. Remember Hyundai's Theta engine? They blamed debris, recalled 1.5 million of them, replaced them, and the replacements failed the exact same way. Well, if it was debris, a clean new engine would have been fine. It was not fine. So it was never dirt. It was designed plain and simple. And here is one more piece of proof you cannot argue with. GM's fix for the 6.2 liter was to switch the oil from 0W20 to 0W40. That is twice as thick. Now you tell me, if thin oil was not part of the problem, why on earth is thicker oil the fix? They are admitting it right there on the service bulletin without ever saying the words out loud. So if it is not really about dirt, and it is not really about luck, then why did these companies do all of this to themselves and to us? Here is the real villain, and its name is CAFE, Corporate Average Fuel Economy. These are the government targets for the average fuel economy across everything a company sells. And the requirements have been climbing hard, 8% a year for 2024 and 2025, then 10% in 2026, driving toward a mandated fleet average of 49 miles per gallon. 49. Meanwhile, an F-150 gets about 20, a Tahoe gets about 18, and a Corvette gets about 16. You see the gap they have to close. And here is how the penalty works, because this is what really drives the decisions. The fine is $17 per vehicle for every 1/10 of a mile per gallon they come up short. That sounds small until you do the math on volume. Missed by a single mile per gallon across 2 million vehicles, and you are looking at about $340 million in penalties. So what do the companies do? They squeeze every last fraction of a mile per gallon out of the engineering, tiny turbos instead of big engines, thin oil, microscopic tolerances, start-stop, cylinder deactivation, every one of the things I just walked you through, is there to shave fuel numbers, and somewhere in a boardroom somebody ran the spreadsheet and figured out that a predictable rate of engine failures is cheaper than missing the CAFE target. So they chose compliance. They chose the fine avoidance over your engine's survival. That is not an accident. That is a decision made on purpose with your money. And it gets worse, which I did not think was possible. In 2025, there was a rule change, a rollback, that pulled electric vehicles out of the fleet average math. Now, before that, EVs counted in the average at something like 200 to 300 miles per gallon equivalent, and that huge number would offset all the gas guzzlers a company sold. A maker could sell a bunch of thirsty trucks and balance the books with EVs, or even go buy credits from Tesla to cover the gap. But now, under the new rule, EVs do not count toward that number anymore, and yet the requirement itself still stands, rolling toward about 34 miles per gallon by 2031. So the makers have to hit that number with no EV cushion to lean on. And that leaves them only bad options. Option 1, even smaller engines with even tighter tolerances, which means even more failures like the ones we are seeing. Option 2, big cuts to power, an F-150 dropping from 400 horsepower down to maybe 250, towing 5,000 pounds instead of 13,000. How do you think that goes over with a man who bought a truck to work? Option 3, put hybrids in everything, which means more parts, higher prices, and battery degradation that tanks the resale value down the road. Not one of those is good for you and me. Every road they can take from here leads to a worse deal for the buyer. Now let me bring this all the way home to what it means for you, the person watching this, who maybe owns one of these trucks or is thinking about buying one. This is happening on $70,000 to $120,000 vehicles at 30 to 40,000 miles. I know of a Tundra that spun a main bearing at 35,000 miles on a truck that was 18 months old. 18 months! And when it fails, the replacement engine is on a 2-month back order while you sit there still making your $1,200 payment on a truck in the driveway that will not move. Your resale value is destroyed. And here is a dirty little detail. Some states exempt a vehicle that is under recall from the lemon laws, so you cannot even use that protection. You are stuck. So let me give you the straight talk on how to protect yourself, because that is why you are here. First thing, go to nhtsa.gov and check your VIN for any open recalls, and if you have got one, schedule the repair right away. Do not sit on it. Second, cut your oil change intervals in half. Whatever the manual says, cut it, 5,000 miles maximum, and use a quality oil and the correct spec for your engine. That thin oil needs to be fresh to do its job at all. Third, turn off the start-stop every single time you drive, every time. And if you want it gone for good, there are OBD2 devices that can make it permanent. Fourth, once you are out of warranty and you are not risking a claim, think hard about running 1 grade thicker oil. If it calls for 0W16, run 0W20. Remember, GM themselves went to 0W40 on the 6.2. They showed you the answer. Fifth, use your ears. Listen for any new ticking, knocking, or rattling that was not there before, and keep an eye on your oil pressure gauge if you have got one. Catching it early is the difference between a repair and a total loss. And sixth, if you are shopping, buy smart. Stay away from first-year redesigns, and be very careful with used trucks from the 2021 through 2024 model years. Those are the COVID-built engines coming due. Honestly, a proven 2015 to 2019 naturally aspirated V8 with 100,000 miles on it may be a safer bet than a 2023 turbo with only 30,000. The old one has already proven it can go the distance. And if you are buying newer, look hard at a comprehensive extended warranty, but read it close and make sure it explicitly covers bearing failures, because that is the exact thing that is going to get you. So here is the bottom line, and I want you to remember this one. Over 5 million engines are failing, not because you did anything wrong, not because you skipped an oil change, but because the makers chose to meet an EPA compliance number instead of protecting your engine's survival. They ran the math, they saw the failures coming, and they built the engines anyway. It was a calculated risk, and they took it with your money and your safety, not theirs. Now you know the real cause, you know the warning signs, and you know how to protect what you own. Take care of that engine, keep your eyes and ears open, and do not let anybody in a showroom tell you it was your fault. Thanks for spending this time with me on the bench.